evening, everybody. My name is Eric Wright. I'm the education specialist for the Wisconsin Veterans Museum. Thanks for tonight for our virtual movie night and discussion. And tonight we're going to be talking about Dr. Strangelove, one of my all-time favorite movies. But before we get started, I just want to mention to everybody that discussion is open. If everybody can just be respective of everybody else's viewpoints and opinions, let's try not to talk over each other. We're going to have a great discussion tonight. And also, I just want to thank the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation for their continued support in providing this free programming. Without their generous contributions, we would not be able to do the free programming that we do, not just movie nights, but our curator conversations and our trivia nights and all the other programs that we have going on. And I will ask Mike to put our events listing link in the chat box. So if anybody else is interested in any of the other events that we have going on, you can definitely register through our website, through our events link. So thanks again to the Wisconsin Veterans Museum Foundation and their executive director, Miss Jennifer Carlson. They do a fantastic job in supporting us. So we're going to get started tonight with Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Like I said, one of my all-time favorite movies. I would definitely place this up in the top 5 of all of my favorite movies all time. This is a 1964 production, filmed in 1963, produced, directed, and co-written by Stanley Kubrick, one of my favorite directors. And then you have a great supporting cast of so many talented actors. We'll talk about those characters as we start getting into all the discussion. Stanley Kubrick, though, you might recognize his name from such films as Spartacus, Full Metal Jacket, The Shining, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and one of his earlier films that dealt with World War I, Paths of Glory, which is another great film. If you have not seen that, I would highly recommend going and taking a look at that one as well. Cinematography for this film was done by Gilbert Taylor, who you might recall from Star Wars and the 80s version of Flash Gordon. Production design was done by Ken Adam, and we'll discuss his role in this film, particularly the war room and his design of that. It was distributed by Columbia Pictures with a release date of January 29th, 1964. And just a little note on that, it was supposed to have its first screening on November 22nd of 1963. But we do have a lot of great historical minds out there. Can anybody tell me what happened on November 22nd of 1963? Exactly. John F. Kennedy was assassinated on that day. So they immediately said, no, let's push the film back. The American public is not going to be in the mood for a dark comedy like this right after the assassination of our president. And so they did push it back to January of '64. It was nominated for 4 Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Actor. This film was originally based off of a book called Red Alert, and it was adapted for the screen. The book didn't have all the dark humor and comedy and satire in it at all. When they went to go to try to make this into a screenplay, Kubrick realized that the direction that they wanted to go with the satire and the comedy was really going to work. And so they got with the book's author, which I have written down here somewhere, I thought. George, oh, good grief. Mike, do you have that slide? Oh, I can't think of his last name. But he did help write the screenplay as well. And he was able to help Kubrick adapt this really intense drama into a dark comedy. And it worked out really, really well for them. It had an initial budget of $1.8 million. And just to speak to how well their satirical stance really helped bolster the movie, they had a box office net of $9.4 million. And that was just in North America alone. So it was a gamble that paid off for Kubrick. He likes to take chances with his films. And in my opinion, they always work. Whatever that guy touches turns to cinematic gold, as far as I'm concerned. I have a list of questions here that we're going to talk about, and we're going to discuss the film. And Peter George, thank you, Mike. Peter George was the author of the book that this film was based off of. My first question was a question that I found on one of the chat boards that I belong to for movie buffs like myself. And I really don't have a good answer for it. And I'm hoping that we get a nice diverse group of answers here, and maybe we can kind of synthesize what maybe the right answer is. The full title of the film is Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. And the first question is, who is the I in that sentence? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Hi, this is Kent. I'm
Hey, Kent.
I wondered if it was the like the kind of like the filmmakers or the writers, but the audience they wanted the audience to be a sort of a stand-in for them. You know, that maybe the audience is supposed to wonder how you stop worrying and learn to love the bomb.
Very well could be. Like Ken said, the I could have been the filmmakers who realized that they are behind the scenes. They're not really up there in front like the actors are, and the real people that they're making the movies for is the audience. So maybe it is the audience. Anybody else want to take a stab at that one? Chris? No, you're muted there, Chris. We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. That's what I thought too. When I was trying to figure out who was worrying, all kinds of people in the movie were worrying, and the people who worried didn't love the bomb, never came to love the bomb. The people who loved the bomb were never worrying. So I kind of figured that nobody in the film fit that subtitle. And as I read some stuff about Kubrick and the background and how he came to film this movie, I came to conclude that was the satirical part of it, that he had so invested himself in the movie, he had read so much about nuclear strategy and so on, that I came to conclude that it was really Kubrick and his co-authors. Yeah,
if I'm not mistaken, there was something like 50 or 60 books on nuclear war that he read prior to going into this project.
Right.
And so he was really well versed in, concepts of mutually assured destruction, proportionality, and not only that, but the protocols that went with delivering, nuclear bombs all over the world. So that very well could be a correct answer also. The title itself, though, and Chris spoke to this just a second ago, but the title itself really does speak to the satirical nature of the film. Before you even step foot in the theater, you see the movie poster, you see the title right there in your face, and it already kind of sets a tone, don't you think, for how the movie's going to be set up and what you're meant to expect when you walk in to see this film?
Well, it almost makes for a surprise ending, because how can you see that and anybody, learn to have loved the bomb? But it sets it up as, I guess, pure satire because it's such a twist at the end.
Yeah, and I do have my own little personal story about the end, and I'll talk about that later on in the discussion. I don't want to talk about my own stuff before we talk about the movie. The second question I put out there was the use of satire and humor. Was it effective in highlighting the absurdity of concepts such as mutually assured destruction and proportionality and deterrence? And if so, how do you think that it really hit those key points?
Well, all the just characters having funny names,
Yeah.
and there were a lot of sight gags. There were, they're always with their chewing gum, and the fact that they were supposed to be on this sort of countdown to how many minutes left, and they don't seem to be in any hurry. There didn't seem to be any intensity or response, like you might have an adrenalized response to the situation. They're all cool. And the audience is the one that's like pressing for what's going to happen next.
Yeah, and I think you're right about that, Catherine. And you also hit on a couple points as well that I'm going to bring up, because there is a lot of symbolism in this movie. Maybe a touch too much, but it's not overt. It's not in your face. And if you're not really paying attention, maybe you might miss out on some of it. Speaking to some other people that have seen the film, I've mentioned certain things, and they're like, "Oh, I never even thought of that," when I watched it. But the names, definitely, throughout the entire film, the names are just so absurd, but they all have meaning. And then also the eating. There's constant eating throughout the movie. The guy in the airplane, the radio operator, he's constantly shoving stuff in his face. Buck Turgidson, General Buck Turgidson, George C. Scott, is just constantly chewing on that gum. There's a huge spread of food set out in the war room. And so we'll talk a little bit about that sort of symbolism as we go on through the program tonight. But you're absolutely right. Just the fact that it's so bizarre and so weird, and the audience they're kind of set up for the fall at the end, and you really don't expect it. And when it comes, it's I don't want to say it's a pleasant surprise, but it's not when I first saw it, it wasn't the ending that I thought was going to happen. Certainly.
May I mention two quick things? You mentioned, I think it was Catherine who mentioned sight gags. I almost missed it. I had to actually rewind. I just borrowed the DVD from the library to watch it again. But when the Army is attacking the Air Force base and they're shooting madly at each other, just for a split second, you see a sign that says, "Please keep off the grass," which I thought was, it's like just the height of absurdity. And also the name Bat Guano, since guano is shit, bat shit crazy. Which is exactly what you're worried about with Jack the Ripper. So there were millions of little gags.
Yep, and the technical term for that they use in Hollywood, that's called mise en scene, M-I-S-E. E-N and in scene. And those are just the little pieces in scenes that directors will put in there when they feel it's necessary to enhance the movie and see if you're paying attention.
I just want to show one thing for a split second. If you borrow the Blu-ray DVD from the library, you will get this with it. This was inside, which then has this inside, which has information about the movie. But on top of that, if you remember at the very end of the movie, when they're going through the nylons and the chocolate that they're going to have as their emergency rations, they also have a Russian Bible and phrase book. Yes. They even put this. And my daughter is majoring in Russian, so I just read the phrases from the book to her. They're all accurate. So it's a very cool little surprise if you borrow it.
And that's my problem with living in this technological age, is that I get all my movies now on Google Play. So I miss out on all those little things. Julia, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the pacing of the movie drove me nuts, because it's this really intense, oh my God, the world's going to end. And they're just like meandering through this and calling and eating. And they, not just the funny names, but that they constantly repeat the names too, which sort of creates this kind of cadence. So I just wanted them to hurry up and save the world. But I would say that the one line that I think for me is my favorite is, "You can't fight here. It's the war room." So yes.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the most quoted line from the movie is, "Gentlemen, you can't fight here. You
can't fight here." Yeah. So yes, I liked it. And of course it was great.
So I'm going to take the movie in parts. There's really only 3 sets for the movie: the bomber, Burleson Air Force Base. You do have a quick glimpse of General Turginson's, I don't know, it looks like a hotel room to me, but it's got to be some sort of private quarters at the Pentagon, because he just whisks right away to the war room. And then the war room itself. And then so how I got this set up, and it was presented in the discussion questions this way, to start with the bomber. And arguably my favorite character in this movie is Major Kong. Slim Pickens did such a great job in that part, but as well, Stanley Kubrick set him up to have a great part. He first of all did not give him the entire script for the movie. He only gave him the script for his parts, and he didn't tell him that it was going to be a comedy. So he played it really super straight, and I think that was a great call by Stanley Kubrick. And Slim Pickens says in an interview that when he found at the end of his filming his scenes, when he had a chance to read the entire script, he said he would have played it completely different. He's glad Kubrick didn't do that because you would not have had the same cinematic presence from Major Kong that you have in the film that we watched. But going back to the symbolism that permeates this film, the first thing Major Kong does when he finds out that Plan R has been issued is he goes to his little safe in the plane. He puts away his combat helmet and he puts on his cowboy hat. And what does that cowboy hat represent in this movie? Or not even in just the movie, but to Major Kong as he's flying this combat mission? Nobody wants to take a stab at that one, huh?
Well, I think it's just giddy up. We're going to get going now. So that's when he's getting moving.
Yeah, I guess giddy up is the word. Yeah, that's good. You know, it's giddy up. Here we go.
Yeah, and that giddy up phrase, when you expand it to a larger diplomatic or a political position, it might be seen as cowboy diplomacy. But it also, I think it represents some sort of American xenophobia at the time. This is at the height of the Cold War. The Russians are certainly our enemy. And so donning the cowboy hat is just the antithesis of what the big red dog, the menace of the red dog represents. And so he's got his cowboy hat on and he's flying his mission for America to save our country and to destroy the enemy.
It's kind of the OK Corral.
It is. And it kind of turns out that way at the end of the film too. But it does represent, that cowboy mentality. And even though he's flying a B-29 Super Stratofortress, one of the most technologically advanced weapons in the entire world, he still could very well just be on his horse, riding to the next town to get in a shootout.
Yeah, that was a B-52D model. They were flying a D model.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
Yeah, yep. B-52D.
And just real quickly as well, Slim Pickens, his character was actually based on a real life person, a gentleman named Alvin Tex Johnston. He was a test pilot for Boeing in the 1950s and 60s. He always wore a cowboy hat when he went on his test flights. And he was known as one of the top test pilots during this time because he was willing to take the chances that other test pilots were not willing to take. So you have this whole Texas thing going on too. As well, one of the screenwriters, let me get back to my page here. Oh, crud, I didn't write his name down either. It was the third screenwriter though. He was from Texas as well.
Terry Southern. Terry Southern.
Southern, that's right. Yeah, thank you. So he was from Texas as well. So there's a lot of centrality about Texas and that sort of American mentality that spurs from there in this film. So they are in the plane. They get the go code. Plan R has been instituted by Jack D. Ripper, and we'll talk about his name in a second. But what do you think about Plan R? Do you think that's something that the military really had in mind? Was that a part of their response package to similar situations that might happen in real life?
Well, I'd like to say no, but I think they in the film they they made it seem very like it was possible, like, plausible that, you kept thinking, well, this is it's so absurd, but then they sort of they laid out why, Turgidson usually laid out why it was like that. You kind of thought, well, yeah, if you're really trying to be careful and whatever, not let whatever, not let it tip or get to the wrong hands or whatever, it might actually come down like that. And that's what I found particularly scary, is that it kind of made sense when they explained it, as absurd as you thought it was.
And I mean, you're absolutely right about how, how you're watching this film and, you're laughing and it's funny, but there's a real sense of horror there because all this could really happen. And even though they have the disclaimer at the beginning that the Air Force says this didn't happen, there was a lot that went on behind military scenes after the movie came out to make sure that this really couldn't happen. There was the personnel tests that they were talking about to make sure that everybody was sane and normal and that they would be able to execute their commands in a reasonable manner. Those were real tests that they did on military leaders back then. And also Plan R was in essence a real plan. President Eisenhower instituted it, and I can't remember the year, but it was known as the Single Integrated Operational Plan, SIOP. And this was a real plan that was instituted by the military, and it was specified conditions for massive retaliation in the absence of civilian authorities. So there really was, in essence, a Plan R out there. I would like to think that maybe it wasn't as crazy as what happened in the movie, but they certainly had something in place at the time to make sure that they could still retaliate against an enemy when the president and the vice president and other top leaders had been destroyed. So it's not too far out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Robert McNamara went through and had a review of that. And even though they continued it a bit, and the concern was that the missile crisis had shown the dangers of this, because during the crisis, I think it was the Air Force accidentally launched a test of an ICBM in the middle of the crisis.
Yeah, and actually in the movie, was it 13 Days? That part, it plays a nice little role in there. And you're absolutely right. How are you going to be in the middle of this sort of crisis and, one hand isn't looking at the other hand or knows what the other hand is doing? And so you do this nuclear test as you're telling, the Russians, hey, you can't bring nuclear bombs over here.
I think I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it's interesting that there's this constant play back and forth between, for every problem that occurs, they come up with a solution, but then another problem occurs. And I think it's the whole idea that, and we see it today too, for every, there's constantly hacks happening to government and corporate computer systems, and then somebody comes up with an anti-hack, and then somebody comes up with an anti-hack. And I think, the point in the movie is, no matter how many fail safes you put into place, something can go wrong on top of the next safety mechanism, and you end up with exactly what happened in the movie, which is scores of nuclear bombs going off all over at the end of the screen as that beautiful song is playing.
Well, and to your point, Peter, I think the biggest, that goes kind of back to one of my first questions is the absurdity of deterrence.
Right.
We have these weapons. Okay, well, we can counter you with these weapons and we can do these things to stop you. And that's just going to force us to come up with something even better.
And there was a point of no return.
Yeah.
Right. And the, what was it? The doomsday device that they had in the movie. And well, it doesn't work unless you tell anybody. Oh, well, we were going to mention it at the congressional meeting on Monday.
Yes, I have to leap in on that because the comments made, like, why did you create such a thing? And they said, well, we certainly couldn't trust human beings to make this kind of decision, which I thought was kind of funny. But one thing I wanted to point out as the discussion was going along, in 1963, there were always nuclear B-52 bombers and B-58 Hustlers that were actually in the air with nuclear weapons, loitering over Canada and other places. And the models that they had, no wing commander had the authority to launch his wing, but they were airborne all the time, alert status, launching the aircraft on standby, which we had up until the 90s. We had airplanes on alert on runways around the country and overseas. They did have once they were airborne, they would respond to an airborne command and control aircraft. Looking Glass is the name of it that we use now. I don't know if it's called Looking Glass way back then. It was an EC-121 back in the 60s. But that was a point of communication, but they would fly to their holding point, which is the go, no-go. And if they did not get a stop message, they would continue, but they could be recalled. And that was why they still have armed nuclear bombers today, because they can be recalled, whereas an ICBM, at least a few years ago, didn't have the technology to be recalled. That's the one leg of the triad. Other one being CLBM, sea launched ballistic missiles. The only one you can stop is bombers. But if they made it that clear, it wouldn't be so much of a plot. So they had to have the crazy wing commander be able to make the commands. So it was a great story, a great plot. There's some ties to reality in it, though.
Where did the Russians keep their planes? Were they flying around Siberia to come over by us?
They would do that, and also they would rove along the Atlantic coast to Cuba, and they believe that those they're still flying Bear bombers and that kind of thing. We don't know whether they're carrying nukes. Our bombers today that fly, the B-52s that fly and train, and the B-2s and the B-1s, although they're all nuclear capable, they do not fly with actual nuclear weapons. There's a scandal a few years ago when by accident, one aircraft flew with live nuclear weapons that were not wired to fire, but they were being carried in the bomb bay. And that was quite a scandal when they landed. Like, how did you get them in the air? But we had nuke alert all the way through the 90s in Europe and in Asia, and all the Navy carriers had nuke capable long range fighter bombers that had targets, and the PSYOP was everywhere, and it's a very complicated PSYOP. And if you ever get a chance, there are some unclassified sources, especially the NATO PSYOP plans, the 3,500 Mike plans, which called for places in what was the old Warsaw Pact countries. One crossroads would be hit by a nuke by a cruise missile. Then 30 minutes later, a fighter was supposed to drop another nuke on an intersection. The plan was so complicated and so overwhelming. Those plans don't really exist today, but at least not in a European scenario. But I think the global, the strategic plan still exists.
Let's talk about the doomsday device. Makes me think of a couple of different movies that had a similar theme. One was, I don't know how many people have heard of it, but Colossus, which is subtitled The Forbin Project. I think it's based on a short story by Arthur C. Clarke. And the other one was the War Games, which simulates this kind of thing. Forbin Project was about both the United States and the Soviet Union having a computer-operated response like the doomsday device. So they were, and it was set up so that nobody could interfere. And then the two computers started talking to each other and started taking over and cooperating in the whole thing. It's a very good movie if you ever get a chance to see it. It's not widely available, but it is on DVD, and it's called Colossus: The Forbin Project.
What was the second movie you mentioned?
War Games.
War Games. Thank you.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of that one, Chris. So I'm definitely going to have to go check that one out. That sounds really interesting.
Well, don't ask me why, but last night I was watching the pilot of MacGyver, the MacGyver in the 80s. And they actually had a plot where a guy mentioned, if this fell in the wrong hands, it could be a doomsday machine or something like that. So I thought, well, that's weird that I just watched this movie.
Eric, you had mentioned the name of the movie, the subtitle, how I learned to stop worrying about the bomb. I just remembered that at the end when Pickens gets on the bomb to drop with it, I don't know if anybody noticed it, but on the end of each of the two bombs, one was
Yeah.
called Hi There and one was called Dear John, which of course is the goodbye letter, right? But it said on there, nuclear warhead, handle with care. So obviously there's no need to really worry since we're handling them with care.
Actually, I'll share my little story right now because it kind of fits in right there, Peter. My first museum job was at the National Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas. And we got a demilled, nuclear bomb, the same one that they used in the movie that we were going to put on display. And as we're unloading it off the truck and, the forklift shifting it around and we're putting it on this little, nice dolly roller so we can roll it into the museum, I said, I can't help myself. The only thing I don't have is a cowboy hat, but I'm going to get on this thing. I'm going to sit on it like a horse and get my picture taken. So I do have my Slim Pickens moment where I am sitting on top of the same nuclear bomb he was. I just wish I would have had my cowboy hat. And you're right, absolutely. It says right on there, and it says on many places, handle with care.
I'd like to make a comment about the title. And now that I've had a chance to think about it, I have always been questioned why it's called Dr. Strangelove, rather than, something that is more about the plot. And it occurs to me that the subtitle has to do with Dr. Strangelove and his ideas about eugenics and taking people down into the mines, having a 10-to-1 ratio and all that stuff. And maybe that's why it's mostly the males how I learned to love the bomb.
Well, and you mentioned the males there as well. And I maybe I can get into this a little bit at the end. I really don't want to fill the conversation with all the phallic symbology that's in the movie, but there is a ton of it. It is a male-centric movie simply because the military at the time was dominated by men, and it was a poke, it was a jab at how and how we exude that warrior mentality.
Yeah.
You're certainly hitting it right on the head there with that, for sure. Mike Olson points out there was only one female character in the movie, and she had a very short part, and the rest was all men. All the symbology and all the use of the cinematographic elements that Gilbert Taylor put in there, along with Stanley Kubrick's prodding. It's hilarious, but at the same time, to sit there and discuss all the phallic symbols and all the sexual undertone and jokes that go on to it, we could spend a whole discussion just talking about that. I do want to mention real quick, we were talking about Slim Pickens. He was not originally cast in this part. That part was originally for Peter Sellers. It was to be his fourth role in the movie. He really could not master a Texas accent, and he didn't want to do that part anyway. But he was contracted to do it. So there's a bit of controversy on whether or not he really faked a twisted or broken ankle. But he told Stanley Kubrick, "Hey, my ankle is broken. I can't do this part. I can't slip in and out of these small spots in the airplane. I can't do this moving around." And so Kubrick said, "Okay, fine. We will get somebody else to play that part. We want somebody who is virtually unknown." Slim Pickens was up until this point, he'd been in a couple other movies and TV shows, but very small roles. He was a former rodeo clown who kind of got into some of these Western productions, Gunsmoke and things like that. And they picked him out. They thought he'd be great. He had never been outside the United States before. And so when he showed up in England, they had to postpone shooting his scenes for an entire month. And when he finally showed up on set, everybody had thought that he had already been to wardrobe, because he had on, his cowboy boots and his dusty jeans, and everybody thought that here's this cowboy They've already sent him to wardrobe. He's already got his stuff on. And he's like, no, this is how I normally dress. What kind of role is this? And actually, James Earl Jones thought that he was staying in character the entire time until somebody told him, no, that's just the way he really is and the way he really talks.
Wow. Wow.
So moving on to my questions about, we're going to switch now from the bomber, and we're going to go and we're going to talk a little bit about Sterling Hayden and Peter Sellers again at Burleson Air Force Base. And there's certainly, well, not certainly, one of the whole premises of the movie is General Ripper's fascination and absolute horror of the fluoridation of water. He thinks that's a severe communist plot to infiltrate America. What do you guys think about that? How far-fetched do you think that is?
There are still people that believe that.
In the 60s, you know, it sound like the man was, you know, those were rhetoric things from the John Birch Society, and
Yep.
you know, the extreme paranoia that many Americans had of communist infiltration in the most bizarre ways. And I thought that was that generation, but it looks like we're still there with a huge bizarre
They
things
have,
today.
don't we have it with COVID? That some people think the COVID vaccination, they thought there were things going in their bodies that they could be tracked.
Well, not only that, but the vaccine as well. Didn't you know the vaccine has microchips in it?
Yes.
So the government can track you and Google can listen to you.
Lord.
Yeah, no, and like Bob said, the John Birch Society, it was a real society, a conservative think tank organization, and they perpetuated this this false rumor that the Russians were trying to somehow control us with fluoride being introduced into our water system. There were laws passed in certain places in the United States that said anyone who was even considering doing something like that will be jailed and executed. I mean, they really thought that this was a real thing. And so for Stanley Kubrick and the other co-writers to include that in there and make that a part of this film and make that Sterling Hayden's, you know, tipping point, I thought that was brilliant. Just brilliant.
I think a lot of the people in the group, just looking at faces, I could be wrong, might remember the McCarthy period. I was born in '52. And I think it was when I was in 6th grade, our extremely right-wing social studies teacher wanted us to do a book report talking about the John Birch Society. And the only books we were allowed to choose were books written by J. Edgar Hoover for the book report.
Oh,
So
really?
it's kind of indicative of what the feeling of the period was.
Oh my goodness. Actually, Peter, on that note, I just watched a great series. And if anybody's interested, it's called America in Color. It's on the Smithsonian Channel. And there is a significant portion of one of the episodes that goes over McCarthyism and the trials and the blacklisting in Hollywood at the time, too. So if you're interested in that and you do have access to the Smithsonian Channel, I highly recommend checking that out. And an interesting note, we're talking about General Ripper, who was played by Sterling Hayden. He's a great actor. He came out of retirement for this movie. He'd been retired from Hollywood for about 5 years. And he was actually a member of the United States Communist Party. So for him to play the role of this crazy general who's trying to thwart communism, but in real life is actually, you know, a communist himself, I thought that was another brilliant casting choice by Kubrick. And being able to coax him out of retirement to play that was fantastic. Another interesting point about Sterling Hayden was during World War II, he was an OSS spy. He went under the name of John Hamilton, and he was responsible for ferrying information and material from Italy into Yugoslavia and helping the partisans. There is a lot of military connections in this movie, and if I have time at the end, I'll go over them. But just the fact that you have all these interesting little tidbits of Sterling Hayden, and then to see him play this role, I just thought it was great. Just these little things that you learn as you study movies, and then you go back and watch them. It just makes them so much more fun to watch again. Going to the names that was brought up earlier. You have obviously Jack D. Ripper, Jack the Ripper, who was a serial killer in London. He was a murderer of prostitutes. But then his opposite on Burleson Air Force Base was Group Captain Lionel Mandrake. And does anybody know what the significance is of Mandrake or the Mandrake plant or root?
Poison.
Wasn't it a hallucinogenic?
I don't know about a hallucinogenic, John, but it was certainly an aphrodisiac. That was
Same thing
used
for me.
Oh, and I got to follow that one up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I got nothing now, John.
Try and stay on point here.
No, you're doing fine. That was a good one. But it was kind of like a counterpoint to Jack the Ripper's name. And hopefully I'll get a chance to talk about a lot of the other names toward the end of the discussion. But it was set up specifically for that fall. You have Jack the Ripper, who's the serial killer, but then Lionel Mandrake, who's, he's the epitome of an RAF officer. He's mild-mannered. I wouldn't say meek, but certainly softer spoken when sitting next to the General Ripper. And then the name itself just kind of lends itself to how those two are tied together. And we see the same in the War Room as well. Merkin, Muffley, there's a lot of context in there. Buck Turgensen, there's context in there as well. Mike, can you bring up the slide of the Russian ambassador? There's also context in there as well through the names. Wait for Mike to get that up. There he is. Peter Boole, Russian ambassador Alexei de Sadetsky, which can be interpreted as being named after the Marquis de Sade,
Yes.
who was a sadist and a sexual criminal, I guess, in the royal court in France. So you have all these interesting aspects of Kubrick and the other co-writers working these names in. But I thought the funniest setup was Ripper and Mandrake. I thought that one went over really well. Did anybody else notice or pick up on any names before I start talking about them? I'll give other people a chance to get their 2 cents out there for those.
Well, the Russian there was Kiss Off. Kiss Off.
Any of the other ones? I make it look so easy because I have all my notes here, but really, I mean, there's a lot going on. Major King Kong. King Kong is a symbol of a male beast with primitive and destructive, obsessive personalities. Dr. Strangelove. I'm not even going to try to say that in German. I can't remember what character it is, but he says it in German in the movie itself. And it literally translates to strange love or perverted love. Buck Turgensen, obviously Buck, a male animal. Being turgid is the act of, how do you say this?
You got it, Eric.
You guys got it. Yeah, thanks.
We got it.
Appreciate it. And then Peter pointed out earlier, Bat Guano. This guy, he's BS crazy. And Kiss Off. And then the bombs themselves. Oh, and somebody mentioned, or it was Peter, I think, mentioned that the writing on the bombs, Dear John and Hi There. Interesting little side note. Slim Pickens actually wrote the Dear John on that bomb because he had a horse named John back on his ranch. Another thing though that really this information, you really got to dig for it. Their primary target, the bomb crew, was the ICBM complex at La Puta. Anybody speak Spanish?
Yeah.
Yeah. La Puta is a derogatory term. And so that's just one more way that they used names to make this film not only funny, but also very dark at the same time.
I thought it was interesting they had Johnny Comes Marching Home just running through it constantly.
Yeah, absolutely, Lisa, on the plane, you're right.
And I actually had to, like, I know there's another name for this, but I'm an elementary school teacher, so it was ants go marching. The ants go marching one by that, and I'm like, I know that's not the real name.
Well, and then there's also, you said Johnny Comes Marching Home, but then that tune is based off an older tune, if I'm not mistaken, an older British tune. And I can't recall the name of it right now. And if anybody out there knows it, you can certainly throw it out there. But yeah, it was just constantly repeated throughout the entire, anytime you went to the scenes of the bomber, that's what's playing. And now that you mention it, it's stuck in my head and it's going to be there all night long. So we move on from Burleson Air Force Base. Jack the Ripper. General Ripper's already given the go code, and there's a lot going on as we go into the war room. What did everybody think of the war room scene? How did that play for you?
Impressive.
Impressive?
Pretty much what I would expect, probably what happens.
Oh God, I hope not.
You watched Who's in Washington?
I thought the big table looked like a game table, like you see on the World Poker Tournament or something, big round tables.
And that stands to reason, John. That table was about 22 feet long, and it did have a green covering on it. They wanted to do that on purpose, even though the film was shot in black and white. And it was meant to represent a poker table. And you have all these generals and civilian leaders, and basically what they're doing is they're playing a game of poker with the world. Now, there's a great picture of it right there. And then you have the lighting, the big overhead light that wraps all the way around. They use that on purpose to try to intensify poker faces of all the players who were sitting around the table.
And
It
you
also
mentioned
struck.
Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, I also thought of the ground of that table as a sort of a version of the round table, King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table.
That's an interesting point. I'm gonna write that one down. I did not think of it that way. That's yeah, you're right. Very well could be.
Tables that big are not, the room size is probably larger than you'd find anywhere at a Pentagon facility or at Northcom, NORAD. But tables that big that can seat that many are there today. And normally each one has a phone and each one has a connection for a laptop. My information is probably about 8 years old now, but I'm sure it's still the same. And they do have the big screen, probably not so clean, not so spacious, but that's what they look like as far as how many people can they do there. And that's not even including the spaces for the subordinates who aren't seated at that big table. I haven't seen a round one, but in my experience, I've been able to see at least 3 large ones, all rectangular, that could seat some 20 to 30 people.
And then you got the supporting elements sitting up against the wall all the way around the room. Yeah.
Correct.
Eric?
Yes.
With all the eating and then the tables and the view of the people sitting around the table, the Last Supper. So whether the Last Supper that you're doomed or the Last Supper with those who are there at the seat of power.
I love having these conversations with you folks, because you're a smart group, and you're picking up on things that I never would have thought of. Mary, that's excellent.
I wanted to add about the war room. In one of the supplements on the Criterion disc, the Blu-ray disc, there's one of the interviewees mentions that when Ronald Reagan came into office, he asked to see the war room. And somebody said, there is no war room. And he said, well, I saw it on Dr. Strangelove.
That's a true story. Mike and I were just talking about that before the event started tonight. Yeah, even Ronald Reagan thought that there was really a room just like that, where all the leadership would sit down and plan, how to conduct warfare or whatever it is. And yeah, there just really wasn't. Bob, you said you've seen rooms like that,
Yeah.
but I'm sure that they, I don't know, were they for that particular planning phase for military leaders and things like that?
I've right now there's one at Tyndall Air Force Base. I'm sorry, Tyndall Air Force Base for CENTCOM. That's actually CENTCOM is down in Tampa at MacDill. There's one like that down there. There's one at Tyndall, which is the Air Defense. I think that's 1st Air Force. NORAD has much the same thing, and that's called NORTHCOM. And the ironic thing, when we had the British officer as the exec, NORTHCOM, either the commander will be a Canadian or the assistant DO, the number 2 will be a Canadian, because NORAD is also North American Air Defense and NORTHCOM. So Canadians either have command of it or an American does, and they exchange it. That's sort of a diplomatic role. But yeah, they have places like that, but they don't have buffets. No buffets.
So we're not going to eat any poached eggs, huh?
No poached eggs.
And then you said they have the big boards as well. They had these big boards also in this film. Kubrick came into a little problem with the set design of this, because the lights that they needed to use for the big boards created so much heat that they were melting the maps that were behind them. So he had to come up with his own sort of air conditioning ventilation system to keep those maps cool from all the bright lights and the heat radiating off of them. And I just thought that was kind of an interesting little side note. Peter Sellers is visible twice in the war room scenes, once as President Merkin Muffley, again as Dr. Strangelove himself. All of his lines for Dr. Strangelove were completely improvised. There was no scripted lines for that. And then for the president's lines, of course, his back and forth exchanges with George C. Scott, General Buck Turgidson. That was all scripted, obviously. But General Buck Turgidson is also based off a real life person. Can anybody think of who that might have been?
LeMay.
Exactly right. Air Force Chief of Staff Curtis LeMay. He was extreme anti-communist, and he even said at one point that if he were to ever run and be elected for president, he would be happy to start a nuclear war with the Russians. I could see it loosely based, or George C. Scott's character loosely based on that, but this was really a step aside from the types of roles that George C. Scott would, that you would normally see him in. He's not really known for his comedic presence, but he is absolutely hilarious in this movie. Just another quick little side note, James Earl Jones, one of the bomber crew, this was his first film role. Kubrick went and saw George C. Scott in a staged production of Merchant of Venice, where George C. Scott was playing Shylock. And James Earl Jones had a small part in it, and Kubrick thought that he was a fantastic actor, and he immediately wanted to get him in on one of his projects. And so this was his first role in cinema. He would obviously go on to be Darth Vader's voice and so many other fantastic roles. But this was his first one, and it was because he was on that stage with George C. Scott in The Merchant of Venice. Okay, let's talk about the actors. One question I always put out there every single month, who was your favorite actor and why? And we'll start with Catherine and Kent, because that's the way it goes on my screen.
Okay, I just have to say this was one of my dad's favorite movies also. So when I was a teenager, I saw it numerous times, on Saturday night theater, late night theater or whatever, or Sunday matinee, because my dad would make me stop all homework or whatever I was doing and come and watch Dr. Strangelove with him. So I hadn't seen it.
Sounds like something my son would say.
I hadn't seen it in years though. I've got to say Slim Pickens. I mean, you stole my thunder, Eric, but he provides the iconic image that, that may be the still that you see the most from this movie is Slim
That's what I
Pickens.
like.
Yee-hee.
Oh.
So I got to say that.
How about you, Catherine?
Well, I thought the character of the president was really interesting. That he was, kind of powerless in this, and you think of the commander in chief as in that role, but he just it was all beyond his control also. So he was, kind of as helpless as the rest of the audience.
And a lot of reviews basically said the same thing about Peter Sellers' role as the president, but I always kind of took it from the opposite perspective. He's making decisions there that a president would not normally make. He's inviting the Russian ambassador into the war room. He's calling the Soviet premier on a direct line and telling him what's going on. I think those were pretty bold steps that he took to try to avert crisis and try to tamp down the situation. I don't really think you would see a politician doing much of that. Maybe I could be wrong. But I just thought that the president was an interesting character simply because of the way they wrote his presence in the war room. Lisa, who was your favorite character?
Mandrake.
Oh, Group Captain Mandrake. Okay.
Because I thought he kept trying. It was futile, but he kept trying to make sense. Trying to get some sense into things.
How about you, Peter? No, Peter's gone. John?
My favorite was Mandrake also, because no matter what situation he was in, he was still upholding that stereotypical British officer demeanor. And even when it was getting coins for his phone call to the president, which was, I was laughing out loud with that one. And the way that Bat Guano was holding his M1 carbine kind of offhandedly with one hand. But Mandrake was my favorite.
If you don't get the president on the phone, you're going to have to answer to the Coca-Cola Corporation. And actually, one of my little joys of doing things like this is I get to put people on the spot. We haven't heard anything from David. Who was your favorite character and why?
I'd say for me, my favorite character was Major Kong, just because of how crazy he is and how, I think
He's very gung-ho.
very, very gung-ho. And also, I think just because of the fact that I don't think I knew that Slim Pickens was just, a rodeo clown before this. So that's really interesting to incorporate that part into the movie as well, into the character.
And then the last person I'll ask, Rob, it was nice to see that you were able to get in here with us tonight. Who was your favorite character and why?
I'm probably going with Mandrake as well, and for the same reasons other people said. I think that stiff upper lip, and then I think the people he played against too. That I don't know how they kept a straight face when they were doing some of their scenes.
They didn't. And as a matter of fact, if you go back and watch the movie again, don't look at the actors who were talking. Look at the people in the background. Many people did not keep a straight face at all. As a matter of fact, Kubrick found it very difficult in the editing process to get the right pieces edited in because of so many people breaking character throughout the entire movie, particularly in the war room scenes. The last question, we're running out of time here. I've only got a couple minutes left. But the last question I want to go over, and I always like black and white films. Black and white films are my favorite. And when you see a director film a movie in black and white when they don't have to, I always ask why. Why do you think that they shot this in black and white? He's just coming off of Spartacus. If you know the movie timelines for Kubrick and his directorial releases. So Spartacus was a full-fledged, colorful, in your face with all the vivid cinematography. And then he goes into something like this and shoots it in black and white. Why do you think he did that?
It's like the classic good and evil.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Good versus evil.
And also
Absolutely.
he used so many close-ups and tight shots and so forth, which I think really come out like I'm thinking of Sterling Hayden smoking the cigar.
Yeah.
It comes off so much better, I think, in black and white, those kind of shots. And he used so many of those. Even Turgidson, when he'd be going crazy, sometimes he'd go on him real tight. And in black and white, that worked real well, I thought.
Yeah, and particularly with Sterling Hayden too, he was kind of going for a film noir sort of effect. And then you're right, when he's chomping on a cigar and he's got those tight shots of his face, and especially there's a couple of where he's kind of coming up from underneath as well. He looks like he should be on Mount Rushmore. He's just bigger than life, and it's fantastic to watch. Anybody else think of why they might have shot in black and white, Lisa?
I thought that the black and white was kind of more serious, and then it like contrasted the farcical parts of the farcical parts of the movie. So it was like a complete contrast.
Yeah,
I agree
and
with Lisa. I was going to say it's almost like a documentary, just the way they had it.
bingo. Yeah, that was one of the things that he wanted to do. Lisa's right. He wanted to have that contrast there, but then he also wanted it to make it more realistic. He did want to have that documentary feel to it, and so shooting it in black and white did provide that for him. Absolutely.
Eric, do you know, was there any connection? I mean, I can't remember if this was made before or after the movie Failsafe, but they're obviously very similar scripts in certain ways. Do you know anything about a connection between the two movies?
If I'm not mistaken, and I'll have to go back and look at the timeline, but if I'm not mistaken, these two films are almost being shot at the same time.
Oh, okay.
And if I have my stories correct, I think Kubrick actually had to put a lawsuit against the production company for Failsafe to halt filming, so that they weren't both coming out at the same time and trying to steal each other's ideas.
He and Peter George filed a plagiarism lawsuit against on Failsafe, and the settlement meant that Failsafe could not be released until 6 months after Dr. Strangelove.
Oh wow, okay, thank you.
I wanted to raise one other point. This goes back to the timing, November 22nd, 1963. It wasn't apparent to me until I watched some of the supplements on the DVD. There's the line where Slim Pickens, they're going through the inventory, and at the end he says, "Guy could have a real good time in Vegas with that." That was a line that was looped in after the assassination, because the original line, and if you watch his lips, the original line was, "A guy could have a real good time in Dallas."
Oh my gosh.
Oh wow.
So they went, and I didn't notice that until it was highlighted in one of these supplements. And if you actually watch it at that point, if you're aware of it, you can see his lips form the word Dallas.
Oh shit! Wow.
Wow.
And there's some sort of, it's a medical term for the disconnect between what you're seeing and what you're hearing. I can't remember the name of the term, but a lot of people, when they watch that scene, they combine the two. And so I read a few things that said people, basically the line that they hear is a fella could have a pretty good time in Vegas, because you're seeing him pronounce the D, but then he's saying Vegas. So it turns, a lot of people hear that as Vegas. But yeah, you're absolutely right. They had to fix that too, along with the release date.
Just one quick comment.
Sure.
I think it was March who mentioned the biblical allegorical aspect of it, maybe like the Last Supper. It just dawned on me when you were asking about favorite characters. The only miracle we get to see in the movie takes place in the war room, which is the same place where the buffet, the Last Supper, is happening. And that's when Peter Sellers stands up and says, "Mein Führer, I can walk." So, I mean, I had never thought of that until she mentioned the idea of the biblical parallels.
Yeah, and I could go on night like this. The issue with Dr. Strangelove and his uncontrollable hand, that's actually a real medical condition. And if anybody's interested, I have that right here. I had it right here. Oh, it's called agnostic apraxia, or alien hand syndrome. It's a real thing. And it's caused by damage to nerve fibers connecting the brain's two hemispheres. And the result is random apparent movements of the hands, one opposite of the other. So it's not just some funny thing that he's trying to do. It really is a medical condition.
It's
Well,
kind
I
of
was wondering I'm sorry. I was wondering if there's any connection with how many scientists were brought over from Germany to work
Oh, sure.
on the bomb.
Actually, Dr. Strangelove character is based on 5 different German scientists. Werner von Braun being one of them. So yeah, there's absolutely a connection there for sure.
going to say the alien hand syndrome thing reminded me of a scene from an entirely different movie, Young Frankenstein, where the Kenneth Mars character is unable to control his arm in much the same way that Strangelove is.
Mm.
So did anybody think that the president looked like Adlai Stevenson?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting.
And that was on purpose. They wanted to make him, you know, the conservative figurehead of the political party at the time. And so yeah, they did that on purpose, and that was actually Peter Sellers' idea.
Oh.
The non-American was, you know, basically making fun of the American political system and some of their leaders.
Eric, I did want to mention something about, we talked about symbolism earlier and the use of music. The opening credits of the movie, just at the very beginning, the song that was playing was Try a Little Tenderness. And then the ending song was We'll Meet Again.
Yeah.
So it kind of capped both ends of the movie with a let's try a little tenderness and then we'll meet again because we lost it.
Thanks for showing up, Lisa. I'm sure we're going to go just a couple more minutes. I could talk all night, and I know some of these other folks could too. John, to kind of go off of your point there as well. What was it that I read? Oh, I lost my point completely. It related to what you were just talking about, but I didn't take a note on that, and it completely slipped my mind.
Music?
Was it?
Music.
It had to do with Ripper's ending in the movie being in the bathroom. Oh, and Buck Turgidson, he opened the movie being in the bathroom.
Right.
Yeah. So there was the bathroom connection as well, which I'm sure you can probably massage into the whole sexual nature of all the other gags and jokes that were in the film, and the names and everything else.
There's a point about the
past 8 o'clock. I am going to bid everybody a fond evening. Thank you so much for showing up tonight. Once again, I have many notes that I didn't even get to tonight. I always come over prepared, but I have such great attendees to my movie night discussions. I could probably not even take any notes, and still we would be able to go on and on and on. Next month, we're going to be watching A Soldier Story, related around February, which is African American History Month. So if you have a chance to watch that over the next couple weeks, fantastic. We'd love to see everybody back for the movie night discussion next month for A Soldier Story. And Mike here as well has put up some of our other events coming up in February. And so I will bid everybody good night, fond farewells, have a great weekend.